Thank you. And greetings ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a special evening. I'm Karen Loew, the Director of East Village and Special Projects at the Greenwich Village Society for Historic Preservation. GVSHP is a nonprofit founded in 1980 to preserve the architectural and cultural history of Greenwich Village, East Village, and NoHo. We're glad you're here, and we encourage you to become members. There are brochures in the back. We're also grateful to Judson Memorial Church for hosting us in this beautiful space. Tonight we are diving into a topic that's on our minds so much lately, the ongoing closure of our favorite independent businesses. It's a large, complicated subject, so we'll focus on one slice of it, restaurants, or actually restaurants, cafes, bars, and food shops. That alone is large and complicated too, but you have to start somewhere, so think of this as a beginning of a conversation that will continue. There are two sides of our subject tonight. One is the neighborhood joint, like University Restaurant near Union Square, Shima's Sushi in the East Village, or Manitou's Restaurant on Bleecker Street. All of them closed now. These are the basic everyday places that seem well-liked, well-patronized, and yet they disappear. The bonds of community formed in and around these places evaporate along with them. The second aspect is the truly special place that is unique for its age, cuisine, aesthetic, or history. Arguably, these places are part of New York City culture and should remain here, akin to the art and architecture that we preserve. Our panelist Robert Sietsema makes that argument, and his historic restaurant preservation plan is a jumping off point for the evening. In fact, the projected images behind me are places our panelists said they would like to see preserved. I also threw in Lilac Chocolates and Florence Meat Market because they are all businesses that have thrived through changing times. We at GVSHP can tell you preservation of any kind is not easy. We mostly focus on buildings, and even there, stakeholders have very different views of what is distinctive, what's worth saving, how far to go to save it, and what market interventions are reasonable. The New York City Landmarks Preservation Law turns 50 next spring, yet preservation is still controversial. Oh, and by the way, I should note that while my organization is thrilled to be convening this discussion, we are not endorsing any point of view. So there are a lot of questions. We're not going to answer them all tonight. Skeptics of business preservation will ask, how do you preserve a business, a living, changing thing? Shouldn't affection equal patronage, which equals survival? Is the owner perhaps not savvy enough or not keeping up with the times? Do they have a succession plan? Who's paying for this in terms of preservation? And who exactly is benefiting? But supporters will ask, what independent business person can pay double or triple the rent when a lease is up? What mom and pop can compete with the chains? Why can't we just ban chain stores or institute commercial rent regulations? Why does our homegrown culture have to give way to homogenization by developers over and over again? Well, before we tackle these questions, let me mention a few facts. Although we keep saying goodbye to eateries, food shops, and bars, the overall number is not going down. The newbies of today may be the classics of tomorrow. Our panelist, Professor Stacey Sutton, studies such things and will explain further. Also, a bill has been introduced into City Council called the Small Business Job Survival Act, which would require, at a commercial lease's end, it would require the landlord to negotiate with the tenant for fair renewal terms and enter mediation or arbitration if needed. Alas, this is pretty much the same bill for commercial rent regulation that has gone nowhere for years. New York City is hardly the only place on earth to wonder how to hold on to its character in the face of globalization, homogenization, and rising costs. But other cities are already taking action. San Francisco has the Legacy Bars and Restaurants program to drive patrons to its most historic and deserving haunts. Buenos Aires, Barcelona, and Paris all have programs to support the taverns, apothecaries, and cultural spaces they find distinctive. England passed a law to help community groups buy traditional pubs so their taverns would stop being converted to other uses by developers. Business preservation may be hard, but apparently there are some paths to try. Without further ado, we will get to the discussion, after which we will have a Q&A session. Please see your programs for the panelists' full bios, but let me introduce food writer Mimi Sheraton. All the way that way. Food writer Mimi Sheraton. Next to her is real estate broker Robert Perl. And next to him is urban planning professor Stacey Sutton. And next to Stacey is restaurant critic Robert Sietsema, who wears a mask in public venues like this so that he doesn't have to when he is reviewing restaurants. The first thing we'll do is ask Robert to tell us more about his historic restaurant preservation plan, which was published at Eater New York, eater.com, in January, I believe. And Robert was bold enough to propose a plan. So tell us about it, Robert.
Well, keep in mind that I did this.
Closer.
Keep in mind.
It's not working.
Hello? Oh, it does work. Okay. Anyway, my proposal, and this happened right after Gray's Papaya went out of business. And it struck me that Gray's Papaya was a kind of a unique institution. Not only was it a cheap eating place that a lot of people depended on for like a snack on the run or for a cheap meal. On top of that, it represented something that had significance to the history of the city of New York. Everyone knows the story of Nathan Handwerker and how the Coney Island Frank got its start. But this evolved into a situation where, to working class people, hot dogs were considered to be an important foodstuff. So this institution, when it went out of business, not to mention being like a really colorful corner in Greenwich Village and a landmark that everybody recognized. So I said, well, why is it that restaurants like this have to go out of business when landlords make ridiculous demands? I mean, it was clear to me that by doubling the rent, that the landlord basically just wanted to get Gray's Papaya out of that space. And now, does anyone know what's being done with the space right now? Has anyone passed in the last few days?
The yogurt place?
Well, the point is no one has moved in and the place is still vacant. As a matter of fact, all over the West Village, despite the fact that we are in the highest real estate market that we've seen in decades, there's an alleged real estate boom going on. There are probably about 40 or 50 empty restaurant storefronts that sit derelict, the facades fall off, rats run in and out, and they're empty. It is in no one's interest that these places be kept empty. So anyway, my idea was to have a proposal by which restaurants of historic and cultural significance could be preserved. In this age, as in no other except since perhaps Roman times, has food meant so much to so many people. I assume that all of you are foodies, or if you claim you're not foodies, you probably know a few foodies. Well, what are foodies interested in? Food. And one of the greatest expressions of our eating culture is restaurants. We have restaurants that are part of the fabric of the city, places like Katz's, places like Nathan's, places like the Namwa Tea Parlor. We have restaurants, places like Sylvia's, places like more obscure places like Mitchell's Soul Food in Prospect Heights, Brooklyn. These are places that represent our history as a food-consuming people, and the idea that some capricious impulse on the part of a landlord, the idea that they can double their money overnight, is that more important, what a landlord does with his property, than the aspirations of an entire culture, an entire city? I mean, I believe that there is a vast potential coalition of people who want to see historic restaurants preserved. When Bloomberg came into office, his intent was to make this a tourist town, where tourists would double and triple and become a mainstay of the economy, and that has happened. Well, it's in the interest of tourists to be able to go to historic restaurants too, rather than chain restaurants. There's all sorts of reasons. When I first moved to the East Village in 1977, there was one franchise restaurant that I knew of south of 14th Street. Now there must be hundreds of them. They are taking over. They are a plague. They take the money, they pay people almost nothing, then they take the money and send it out of state. So, I mean, we have many reasons. And my proposal was simply to start a committee that would decide, initially choose perhaps 30 restaurants that were worth preserving, and then do everything in its power to preserve those restaurants. That could involve negotiating with landlords. It could involve in providing legal advice. In the case of disasters or fires, it could involve bringing people in that could assist the restaurant owners. It could also, I mean, there's a whole bunch of aspects to this, and I don't remember all of them, but the whole point is that this committee, which could consist of 3 people, a chef, a real estate representative, and a city council person, was what I proposed. But you can make up your own idea of who should be on the committee. But the whole point is to do everything in our power, and it would be a legislative power, to keep historic restaurants in business for our future generations. Because I, for one, don't want to see my own offspring faced with a New York where the choices between restaurants are mainly just McDonald's and Burger King and even Chipotle. So anyway, that's a quick summation, or maybe not so quick.
Thank you, Robert. And when you published it in January, I knew that you got some hearty accolades from people like Mario Batali, if I remember correctly. Yeah, so a lot of restaurateurs agreed. Are there any restaurants from the past that you wish had been preserved that you could go to today?
Well, that Bridget's Sandwich Shop on Greenwich Avenue, a little tiny place that proved that French food doesn't have to be expensive. Although maybe Mimi is going to say it's not French food.
So go ahead. We're going to respond to this. There's so many ways to talk about this in terms of business, in terms of potential interventions. But first, we're going to talk about food culture.
Is this working?
Yes.
If they proved that French food didn't have to be expensive, why are they out of business? Maybe it wasn't expensive enough.
Well, this is not a good example because we don't really know why they went out of business. My guess is that the landlord tripled the rent.
But the landlord has a right to do that, and if they don't have a product that can get that price, you talk about future generations. What makes you think future generations are going to want to go to the kind of old-fashioned place their parents went to?
Well, and your implication is that the rights of a landlord in the city are absolute, which is not true. A landlord should not be able to do anything he wants to do with his premises.
Should not be able to do, or is not be able to do?
I think there already are limits in place. For example, there's rent stabilization laws, there's zoning laws, there's many things that limit what a landlord is able to do with his premises. And I see no reason why, if you undertake to own a building that has like Katz's in it, that you shouldn't be able to just close the restaurant by tripling the rent. Bob, what do you think?
I share your feelings very much. That'd be great. Ideal if we could preserve our culture. And we should look for ways to do it. The problem of controlling it, whether it be an individual case or for a whole city, is it creates both moral problems as well as economic practicalities that pretty much will shatter. The results will basically not be what we expect. More or less the law of unintended consequences will rule quite often.
Well, what do you mean by moral consequences?
Let's go to the moral side of it. You know, you're right, a lot of the time you'll hear the rent is what caused this business to close, but frankly, it's often not the rent. There's several reasons for that. First off, most restaurateurs will know when they're running a successful place, the rent is a much smaller fraction of their cost than their labor cost, management cost, payroll, etc., and their food cost. And in fact, if the rent starts to equal those two costs, well then their margin is probably gone if it gets anywhere near there. So you can often absorb a significant increase in the rent. It will hit your bottom line, but it's so important as to what your top line is producing. That's really what restaurants live and die by, how their gross keeps growing. It doesn't mean there's not cases where you'll see wholesale losses of restaurants based on rent. You could think of corridors. Columbus Avenue maybe had tons of restaurants in the 80s or 70s that couldn't afford to keep up with the clothing stores. You'll see that happen on Bleecker Street now. Clothing stores can afford to pay rents that are higher per square foot, and they will step in. But when I say the moral issue, sometimes you'd be surprised to think the places we want to save, the restaurateurs may have more money than the landlords. And would we want to look at that as a factor? Danny Myers, one of the greatest restaurateurs the city will ever know. Danny Myers, he's so well respected and he's built up such a great business that there's private equity that's flooded to get buy in with him. And we're talking big international hedge fund level money. Hundreds of millions of dollars these groups have. And they want a piece of the cash flow. They want a piece of the business, and allows Danny to grow, whether he chooses to do Shake Shack or move Union Square. Maybe he has different companies, these different operations. But Danny's very successful and wealthy. Now, I can't tell you who owns his building right now, but they may be much smaller next to the hedge fund group that has the property. So for us to create an economic benefit for a hedge fund group over maybe a landlord, would that be something that would make moral sense? Should we stand behind that?
Well, all I can say is that you're attributing a much more ambitious program to my modest proposal, which just involves really picking a handful of places and trying to defend them by whatever means are available. And that doesn't mean you will always be successful. That means that you are interested in preserving Katz's, for example, when they decide to tear it down and build a condo, and you will go to the wire, go to the, as far as you can in terms of trying to create a situation to preserve it. I don't mean we're going to be handing out huge amounts of money to wealthy investors. I mean, it's more like we'll try to negotiate more reasonable lease terms. We'll try to help if there's another flood by contacting federal authorities and trying to negotiate, help for a business that's in trouble. There's a lot of different things we can do, but at the root of it is our attempt to preserve restaurants which are culturally indispensable. And I agree with Mimi that a lot of restaurants should get out of business. For example, that Manitou's that you like so much is a horrible diner, not worth preserving.
But I wouldn't say it's a landmark. It was a convenience, but it was in no way an indigenous village landmark. And there you have the question of perception. Which places are correct? I hold no grief at Katz's. Katz's can go any place they want. And I'm surprised they haven't sold out to become a chain long before this. You mentioned John's Pizzeria and another, but how about Lombardi's, the first place that ever served pizza in New York?
Yes.
So how do you define what you can preserve? And what I see in the examples from London and San Francisco is landmarking a setting, a historical building and setting, like McSorley's, Pete's Tavern, P.J. Clark's, a number of places like that that are bars and taverns, which are much easier for a follow-up tenant to operate successfully than, let's say, Zito's Bread Bakery or Mandara's Mozzarella Shop, because they're going to do the right thing. How are you going to put someone in who is going to maintain the quality and the character? I mean, you should be cheering Graydon Carter. He has saved the Waverly Inn, he has saved the Beatrice Inn. The man
I'm not exactly cheering, but I give him a...
There,
a very light pat on the back.
The sign is out, the place is there, they are in a landmark district, they can't change the signage, and it's a restaurant that looks more or less as it always did.
What about Minetta Tavern? Are you happy with what's happened to that?
Well, you also want them to maintain the price level of the predecessor? Fedora, I mean, was a very inexpensive restaurant.
Yeah, it was also awful.
Excuse me?
It was also awful. I only want to preserve good restaurants.
Nobody would go to the premises at the price that Fedora or the Waverly Inn showed, whether they were good or bad. Fedora had a big following.
Yeah, I am relatively happy with what's happened to Fedora compared to some other premises. I mean, there's a lot of different degrees, a lot of increments here, whereby a place can be preserved, its facade can be preserved, its menu can be preserved, but I mean, they all have to be taken on a case-by-case basis. The places that I'm most interested in are the places that serve great food and historic food and come from the past.
Must they be hurting or can they be successful? Katz's is not hurting.
Katz's is in pretty good shape, but still I think if somebody comes along and says, here's $8 million, let me build a condo on your
What about
slot.
Safeguard?
Guys, I'm gonna jump in for 1 second.
Like most downtowns,
Party Greengrass, but not Safeguard?
I don't go north of 14th Street.
So we're gonna get back to our convincing, but I want to let Stacey get a word in edgewise. You'll give your mic back to her. But let me untangle. There's so many strands here. I think that what Robert is advocating for is one thing is the enshrining of the importance of restaurants in a way that has not yet been done. And so if we were to say these 10, these 30, these 100 restaurants are essential to who we are as New Yorkers, to who the city is, they're part of our culture, like the Metropolitan Museum, maybe, not quite. They deserve to continue. We need what they have. And so certainly the question of whose pocket is being lined is important. But in a way it's a side issue because there's the enshrining. But let me get back to what Bob calls the moral issues because Stacey mentioned to me that in her work, looking at neighborhood dynamics, that among her colleagues, that sometimes they say, you know, why are we talking about retail? We can't even keep people in their homes. Don't talk to them about commercial rent control when there's truly dwindling support for residential rent regulation, and of course the number of units that are regulated goes down every year. Stacey, can you talk to us about that?
The conversation overall is a really interesting and important conversation in terms of preservation, whether we're talking about whether we're talking about restaurants or other types of retailers. So just to keep the conversation focused, we're focusing on eateries. And I've thought quite a bit about the turnover in our city in terms of how both restaurants and other small businesses are turning over, largely because they can't afford rents, but there's an array of other factors in place. And in terms of thinking about a mechanism that can help businesses stay in place, there are a lot of criteria that we have to kind of pull apart. Are we trying to preserve the place? Are we trying to preserve the experience? When I speak to my colleagues about these issues, as Karen said, they find it's kind of a non sequitur in that our cities are very expensive cities. So as neighborhoods change, as the socioeconomic conditions of our neighborhoods are changing, it's not surprising that the establishments also change. Because a lot of that is demand driven. And as I understand Robert's proposal, it's about intervening in that point, the point in which perhaps the local residents are demanding something else, but the question is whether should we keep the restaurant as it is? And that's a conundrum. I mean, I don't have an answer to that, but I do think there are tools that we can use that we've used in other cities, or that other cities have used in terms of trying to allow a restaurant to stay in place, a restaurant or other establishment, through mechanisms that the city can put forth in terms of negotiation for leases or other kinds of small business support. I think the point that I wanted to make to Bob is that it's kind of futile to think of the most successful businesses, because most of our cities are really small businesses, right? And so we often talk about the tension between the large and the small. In New York City, we have the fortune of being a city that is disproportionately small businesses, right? Disproportionately independently owned businesses.
And you mean disproportionate to the rest of the country?
Disproportionate to the rest of the country, disproportionate to most urban areas. So when I say disproportionate, I'm saying over 85% of all of our businesses are small, independent businesses. And small is variable, right? And small can be 3 persons or it can be 50 persons, but they're independently owned. They're not part of a large chain or large corporate entity. So I think if we focus on that segment rather than those that are supported through large hedge funds, we're also narrowing the spectrum.
Even when you look at these smaller places, the backstory is somewhat different than what you might hear in the press. Second Avenue Deli, when Lee Ball moved out, he said, oh, the rent's going up. I knew what was going on in the rent negotiations. It was just a couple $1,000s more. They wanted to keep him. If you look at him today, he moved to other locations under a new corporation. I would bet you that all the employees are no longer union. His labor costs went down dramatically, and he had a very successful business before. So that was one story you heard. One of my personal ones, Life Cafe. I wanted to keep her as a tenant. I tried. There was another landlord who was looking for $150 a foot for Avenue B. I thought that was absolutely unfair. Unfortunately, she was in 2 spaces where I'd rent her for less than half of that per square foot. If I gave her a break, the money would just go to him. So that wasn't too attractive for me. But the fact was that Life Cafe was not that successful a business in its later years. It was rarely more than 25% full. And so in the end, she left an article saying, the landlord's a real terrorist. Well, it's a great line. And there's cases where it would prove out to be true. But in fact, her business was failing. She was even funding it out of her operation in Bushwick, when she finally figured out when she ran her numbers. And she was never showing up in the East Village. Restaurants require people to be there. They're living, ongoing concerns. And if the host passes it on to managers in these little places, you'll know the difference if you really know the outcome. Very rarely do they maintain the spark they had when the owner was there and it was a fresh operation. Most of the time, these places fold because of reasons like that. The owner's no longer there, or the place is no longer in vogue. There are people who love it. The Life Cafe, was a place where rent was created. We'd love to keep these things, but the best way to keep a place alive is through your patronage. It's through your blogging and social media. And you've got to vote with your dollars. That's what keeps places in business more than anything else.
I have a question, I guess, with regards to the proposal in terms of this committee and this idea that was set up. I'm sorry. In terms of the committee that Robert proposed, I guess I'm of a mixed mind because in some way I like the idea of preservation and preserving various establishments, but I'm not sure who gets to determine or who should determine which ones to preserve, which ones are really iconic for our city. And I think as a very diverse city, we experience restaurants very differently. So how did you think through some of those complexities?
I tried to...
No, you got
I tried to look at a lot of different cultures. I tried to look at factors like age, excellence of the food, historical importance, cultural importance. I mean, these obviously, you could debate these things endlessly, and part of the purpose of the committee is to determine what is a fair set of criteria and how are we going to select these 30 restaurants initially or whatever. It's a very modest program, but the idea is to protect restaurants that have tremendous significance to the city and it's quite ironic that we live in a time when people are more interested in food and in restaurants than ever before, and yet more restaurants are in danger and going out of business. I mean, Junior's is a case in point of a place that could easily go out of business that has tremendous and iconic significance to the borough of Brooklyn. I'm not into protecting restaurants that don't have good food I think by the winnowing process, we're going to find a choice collection of places that deserve to be protected. And I don't think these restaurants are set in stone. I think it's very easy for restaurants to fall off the list too, but just to have a group that pays attention to this and tries to do something about it is important in itself. You know, the final nature of such a committee, which wouldn't be really any different than the Landmarks Preservation Committee or the Greenwich Village.
We have no power to recommend.
Yeah. I mean, this would have some power, but once again, they may fail at their attempts. The whole point is also, of course, just to make it a visible issue. And as you point out, Bob, you know, the best thing you can do is patronize a restaurant. Well, this group that has the power to select iconic restaurants and then try to protect them by a series of relatively weak means, I think would be a good step in that direction.
I'm interested in your use of the word power. Who is giving you that power? 3 or 4 or 5 self-appointed committee members are not going to have power. What's going to give them teeth?
Well, obviously there has to be some sort of charter for this group. I think the government, in the same way that they have a rent stabilization board, could have this board which would be empowered to try to protect restaurants by a number of different means, and maybe they would be successful and maybe not.
I think you can forget that.
Well,
I think if you think this city is going to empower any independent group to force people to a negotiation, you have a very long wait. The Landmarks Preservation Committee doesn't even work, and that's semi-official.
So, Robert, here on this.
all I can say is I haven't taken my cynical pill today, so I have the feeling that if you had a committee of 3 people that were charged with protecting 30 restaurants, that they could probably do a pretty good job.
I don't.
So the key issue
Not in
here,
this city.
I think this is a good C.
so I have an alternate plan, which again is not endorsed by my organization. It gets around the issue of the panel. And that idea is a mix of ideas, including Robert's, and he even told me that it might be fine with him if this one happened. But there currently is an organization called City Lore that I'm sure some of you know about, and they have a list of places that matter. And anyone can, and they want everyone to put, there she is, Molly Garfield. She's places that matter. And anyone can put a place on there, and that's really the point, to say, I like this place, here's why, other people can check it out. So my idea is to have 2 lists that are totally self-selecting. So chefs and fans can put their favorite places on one list, and potential owners and new chefs put themselves on the other list. And on that second list, you know, if I want to take over Zito's Bakery or whatever, or Sylvia's, when Sylvia's family has had enough, you know, I've stated my business credentials, and maybe Sylvia's family, because there are these 2 lists, they could find me. And so because these are totally self-selecting, hopefully the good stuff would rise and the chaff would fall and successors could be found, which Mimi has pointed out to me is a very key part of this problem, right? Where you've seen a mozzarella shop that's amazing, but the son doesn't make mozzarella like the father did, etc.
But you're not going to get anybody else to come in and make mozzarella in a pail of water.
Don't you think in today's maker culture?
No, because they can go next door to Murray's and buy it. It may not be as good, but you don't have the same audience. You're 3 or 4 generations away from the man who made the mozzarella that way. And nobody could afford to go in and do that then. Or suppose someone went into Zito's Bakery and it looked like a bakery and the bread were terrible. That's not a useful replacement. That's why I think the only place it really works is where the setting and the building are worth landmarking, excuse me, and therefore invite entrepreneurs to go in and operate it. And that's a lot of bars, a lot of taverns. There are some settings that are landmarked. The old room in the Plaza Hotel is landmarked. No operator can go in there and put a paintbrush to the walls. They are not saying what you can serve. They are not saying how we can serve it. That's up to the plaza, but it has nothing to do with the landmark. The building that the Bridge Cafe is in is landmarked. The Bridge Cafe is not, but the building is, so that limits what can be done, and therefore might invite someone who sees an antique setting as an asset, as an adjunct. But you have to be careful what you're landmarking, the place or what they're doing in the place. There's no way you can really landmark what they are doing in the place at the quality level and at the price level for the neighborhood. Plus, I've lived in the village for 69 years. I could reel off a string of places I adored that have gone. But you know what? A lot of other places I adore have replaced them. And the village demographics are changing so much. We had a wonderful shop go out of business, Mixed Place. It was a gift shop, not a food store. I went in and asked the guys why they were leaving. They said, the people moving into the village are not the same as the villagers. They don't come in and shop locally. I mean, these guys were heartbroken. They were so successful. It was so wonderful. They were always getting credits in magazines. They're still operating mail order in New Jersey. They said the people who are moving in now do not come in and use the village the way just look at the fresh direct trucks that you see in the village now. That's what the new people moving into the co-ops and condos are doing. I mean, it's a miracle that we have some of the food stores that we do have. So you have to be very careful. What you're preserving means something to you, but it doesn't mean that the people whose memories are not the same.
I guess, can I ask a question? I mean, so, which one? I don't know. Which this one? Loew? Yes, that one. So you suggested that this city would never pass legislation that would allow for or demand that the city intervenes in rent negotiations. So that's the legislation on the table currently, right? The Small Business Job Survival Act that is actually, as I read it, it's exactly the same as the proposal that was put on the table in 2008 that got taken, right? It's exactly the same text. But it seems it's very moderate. All it's asking for is mediation or arbitration, right? It's so that you can't escalate rents above. Well, they don't even give a ceiling. It's just to allow for a good faith negotiation. Does that not seem reasonable?
It seems reasonable, but not possible. We don't have commercial rent control.
No, it's not asking for rent control. It's asking for negotiation. Because a lot of small businesses, now I'm not just speaking of restaurants, but a lot of small businesses have difficulty negotiating with their landlords for myriad of reasons.
Bob, do you want?
I think you could have help negotiating, but I can't imagine that a landlord would be willing to be bound by the negotiations if he has options that would bring him more money. There was a very interesting story in the Times, maybe Sunday, on one way to go to limit the loss of places, and that was the Hamptons now fighting to limit chains from coming into the town. And we have not allowed certain big box chains to come along the West Side Highway. There might be a way to limit chains, which would, let's say Chipotle, if you couldn't have Chipotle every other corner, maybe an independent would go in.
Well, I want to see a quick show of hands. Who would like chains to be banned or limited in New York City? Raise your hand. Let's see. All chains. You make up a rule, Stacey.
I think there should be a limit, right? I mean, I think so. A lot of chains are beneficial for people because of their price points. I think the proliferation of any one type of chain or any one type of establishment, that's what's killing our neighborhoods. Although they seem quite vibrant, it's not sustainable. You can't have a neighborhood of all restaurants. You can't have a neighborhood of all Starbucks. You can't have a neighborhood of all clothing stores, right? We need that retail diversity across it. So,
but wait, it's totally fair to see hands of people who do not want such a ban. Are you brave enough to raise your hand? Raise your hand.
I have seen just in the last 5 years, Dunkin' Donuts destroy the donut scene in Brooklyn. Dunkin' Donuts has driven more ma and pa restaurants out of business that made donuts so that now the independent donut shop in most parts of Brooklyn do not exist anymore. I got news for you. The Dunkin' Donuts are much worse. They're just absolutely horrible. Dunkin' Donuts is destroying the donut culture in Brooklyn, which is a small thing. But I mean, once that's happened in 50 different kinds of restaurants, and we're not going to have a place worth eating anymore. And Mimi says she's happy with the new restaurants moving in. That's because maybe she can afford them, but restaurants are more and more expensive. The ones that you want to eat at now want $70 or $80 from you for a meal. And the little places, like Grace Papaya, where it was a pleasure to eat, where you knew what you were getting, they're disappearing and being replaced by chains. I see no problem with just completely banning the chains, but making sure that you have inducement for cheap restaurants to stay open. I mean, I, for example, I see no reason why there should be 40 empty restaurant storefronts in the West Village. As a friend of mine pointed out, it looks like the Rust Belt main drag in the Midwest. You feel like you're in Detroit. Walk through the West Village, and on certain thoroughfares, Greenwich Avenue, Hudson Street, Bleecker Street, you're going to see empty restaurant after empty restaurant. And what is it that induces these landlords? What chutzpah induces them to think that they can keep these places empty for years at a time? And they do. I could tell you why. It would sound paranoiacal to you, but things are set up really sweet for the big landlords in the city. The landlords run things, and the landlords get what they want, including leaving eyesores open for, empty for years at a time. If I were in charge, I would seize those storefronts and offer them to small restaurant operators. I am not proposing anything so radical as that. I don't think we have to jump up on the barricades, but I would like to see just a few things done to try to protect our indigenous restaurant treasures.
So Bob lives in the West Village. Bob, why are all these storefronts empty? Why is that good for business? Why is that good for a business model?
There are major changes happening globally in terms of what's happening in terms of money. And we're all aware now that there's exponential increase in the amount of capital falling in the hands of the top 1%. And it's also all connected now through Wall Street, which then maybe trickles down money into this city. But the fact is that there's so much money coming in, and a lot of the money that's in other parts of the world is looking for safety. They're looking for a steady income in the worst of times. Well, Manhattan and increasingly Brooklyn represent such a safe zone to put money. So the real estate business, when I got into it, which was in the 80s, was quaint compared to what's happening today. And more, there's money flooding in. It's coming from layers of hedge funds, investment companies that then invest in other groups that ultimately invest in operators who are buying up buildings at record prices. These operators, they're not necessarily in the business for as long as many professionals, but they can then run projections on how they're going to make money. Now, they're showing returns in Manhattan property of cash flows of 2%. So this doesn't sound like a hell of a lot of increase. I mean, maybe you're getting 0.5% at the bank or nothing, but 2% is not historically a great number. It's pretty crummy. So what do you have to do with that? You then have to take that, you have to show how you're going to push the rents up. You're going to project higher rents. And you're going to sell the property in 3 or 4 years. And when you sell it, there's going to be this big increase because you're leveraged in your buy. That's how you get your 10 or 12% return that you're showing the investors. And it's all put in these wonderful projections done by MBAs. Now, if you project a restaurant, a space that's worth $20,000, and you're now getting it on the market, it's really only worth $15,000, let's say. So you're losing money every month. Well, that money is effectively water under the bridge. But as soon as you drop that $5,000 a month, that's $60,000 a year, that's $1 million plus in value you're projecting on this building. So people sit this. There's a lot of money being owned. So it's not necessarily the old timers who've been here. There's new money coming in. They're going to buy the real estate. People who had the building are getting prices they didn't imagine they'd get, and they're selling out. And so that's part of why you see more vacancies. It's a big piece of it. Older time landlords, they want their cash flows. Meanwhile, Bloomberg has, and if you own a restaurant, you're paying part of your rent as additional taxes. You'll all be aware that how come my taxes are now half of my rent, or a good portion of it, and it's crushing tenants to pay these taxes. It's much harder than on a whole building, but Bloomberg has taken buildings and in some cases increased it during his 12 years. The taxes are up 300+%. That's huge. It's crushing tenants, it's affecting the small landlords, but if you're out there just to sell it and project things, well, your cash flows aren't so significant. So that's part of why you see all these vacancies.
Yeah, and also the bankers are, I sound like a communist from the 1930s, but the bankers are colluding with the real estate people and giving them huge sacks of money, and it's no longer necessary for them to even to rent spaces to make money. And, whether a tenant is in a storefront, whether the neighborhood looks shoddy because the storefront is decaying is of nothing, no consequence to the landlords. I mean, they're going to make their money one way or the other. And if you don't think the banks are in a prime position as far as real estate goes, just look at all the goddamn bank branches open up with nobody in them, giant spaces that they can afford to just carry with the amazing amount of money that they have. That they're not using to pay you interest on your bank deposits, by the way. It's horrifying, the position of the bankers and the real estate people in this city and what they've done to our local landscapes.
So, out-of-town owners are a problem for residents, for businesses, and for the city. Stacey Sutton.
To that point, that's something the city can address, and that's something the city can address, and we have begun to address, especially on the Upper West Side, with that new legislation in terms of disallowing new banks on the ground floor. They have to be at least on the second floor. Sorry, I can't. I know. It's hard for me to sit up and just let me just pull it. And so I think things like this, I tend to be slightly more optimistic in terms of the potential of the city in terms of using legislation to address that. So on the Upper West Side, with the commercial rezoning and disallowing banks on the ground floor storefronts, they have to be on the second floor. Those are mechanisms that I think are reasonable, right? And so we can put things in place. It took a lot of fighting, but nevertheless it was passed.
Robert and Mimi and any other restaurant observers here, the very fine or special restaurants that have existed for a long time, what's the recipe there? Is it having a good successor, for example, to take over when the chef has had enough?
I think the mystique has to hold. I think if you're the 21 Club, although I must say it's not doing very well, I think Katz's makes more money than the 21 Club. Still, it's a historic restaurant that every once in a while gets reviewed, that people are in the habit of going to for a certain aura about it. Another way is to keep on having terrific food. If you talk about something expensive like La Grenouille, that has maintained what it always was, and therefore it gets the same level of people. There are very good restaurants in the middle level that are hurting a great deal because people who go to restaurants want to go to the new ones. And what I see in the Village are the hot new ones are jammed and there's a line, and very nice, still very good, not cheap but not exorbitant restaurants can be half empty on certain nights. So I suppose the audience is finite and the new places tend to drive the old ones out. If you're the Palm and you keep on being known for terrific steak and Americans want to eat steak, then people keep going. Other reasons restaurants fail is quality goes down, older people don't want to do it, and their kids don't want to do it. And there's another factor in why buildings are willing to let restaurant and food places lie empty for so long. A lot of buildings don't want food in them. It's vermin, it's garbage, it's all kinds of problems, and I have a feeling that the building in which Manitas was is going to be very happy to have a nice clean Calvin Klein in there where they don't have certain problems. I know a couple of owners of buildings in Tribeca with huge sidewalk spaces that they will not rent to a food establishment. Dean and DeLuca could not find a place to go in the Flatiron District many years ago when Lower Fifth Avenue was being refurbished. No building wanted a food installation. It's messy. there are delivery trucks, all kinds of things like that. So there are many factors that indicate why places are going empty.
Yeah, just real fast, I thought that was a really interesting formulation, maybe that the mystique has to hold. And in thinking of the places on your initial list, Robert, I guess that's true for Peter Luger. People are still interested in Peter Luger, for example. Just to take one, which stands out as, you know, there's so much competition among steakhouses now, but that is a place where it seems they still have some.
I can't think of any really old restaurant in the village that still exists. I think of Gino on 11th Street, but I can't really think of an old restaurant. Sevilla, yes, they get tour groups now. So they have survived, you know. Warnock by Land has changed very much into a special occasion, engagement, birthday celebration, not what it was when it was basically named Barrow Street. It was a Russian restaurant, a very good one.
Well, here's a bit of good news amongst this gloom. A lot of the places that we love, and if you look at Robert's blog that he wrote, really the part I love is all the description of all the restaurants that should be preserved and the eateries. Over 2/3 of them, the real estate is owned by the proprietors. And if I could just go through it, whether it's Venero's or East Village, you can also think of Di Roberta's, Nathan's, Junior's, Nordic Delicacies, McSorley's, Bohemian Beer Garden, Sylvia's, Peter Luger's, Keen's, FICO's, we could go Rocco's across the street, which wasn't on the list, several others that you've listed. They own the real estate. In case of Rocco's, they renovate the space every couple of years. They want to be the most current of these things. So these places that we know and love, so many of them are already owned. They own their real estate. Ottomanelli bought a building just to make sure their meat market would be there when they lost the corner. So a good portion of what we're concerned with will be with us because they were forward thinking, and you have generations that will come back in. And Russ and daughters, they own their real estate. They're expanding now onto Orchard Street, opening a restaurant. So we are having a piece of that. But eventually the Knish place, at some point someone's going to not make Knish's anymore. So we do have that side of the real estate's in their hands. And we keep talking about the pastrami operation on Alston Street. Well, they're going to get to keep their meat and eat their meat and keep it too, basically, because they are taking their air rights, transferring to other parts of their property, they're building, and Katz's will be with us for probably generations.
Well, that's interesting, Bob. It's obviously a very important point to own the real estate, and it occurs to me, Robert, that maybe that's the recipe then, that a program could help restaurant owners to buy their property. Not that it would be charity, they would have to pay it back, but maybe that's what they need. You know, if there's a Totono's or whatever is in danger, and they're smart enough to realize that they need to own the property, then the restaurant preservation could come in the form of helping them to buy it.
It's really what saved Russ and daughters. They had a long stretch of very, very lean years before the East Village turned around, but they always owned that building, and it was a big building with tenants, so they were, you could even live in it, so they would have free food and free rent, survive until the whole world came to them. But I suppose not every small operator can afford to buy a building.
Well, we've covered a lot of territory, and I know that you have questions. We have quite a few owners of cafes and bars and restaurants here, and lots of enthusiastic eaters as well. If you have a question, just raise your hand and Ted will come to you. And if you would say your name and any relevant association, that would be great.
Hi, I'm Monica. Hello, Monica. And I was talking with someone who is a bar or restaurant owner in the village. And I was asking him why there's so many empty spaces, and I guess this would be mostly for you, Bob. At his point, when he said that there was a change in accounting back in the 60s or 70s to the American Generally Accepted Accounting Procedures, which basically sounds very complicated, but what it seems like is that it makes having empty spaces, commercial spaces, profitable. It's more profitable to keep them empty. Is that the case?
Sounds like nonsense.
Really?
But it's seen as a plus on the
It's seen as a plus on the accounting side instead of a debit.
Well, basically, it's as simple as any situation. If you're not making money, you're not paying taxes on the money you're not making. But even with Obamacare tacked on, when you're making money, you get to keep some of it. So there's no major change in accounting. That would mean that when you earn $1, that you shouldn't have some personal incentive to hold on to it. So there's no change in accounting that would, in my mind, make it worthwhile to try and purposely lose money.
So when you're losing that money, it's not an asset.
And it's not an asset.
No, but if you're projecting that you could have a greater value by keeping it vacant, maybe that makes your on the paper you look like your property's worth more. Maybe someone will buy that projection.
That's true. If you're going to sell your property, it better be delivered vacant. So there is a reason why, in this up market where the prices are higher than they've historically ever been before, having those, 40 empty storefronts means that those places can be sold with no strings attached. Also, I remember from my 9 years in the real estate business, where I worked as a financial analyst for a real estate company, that a lot of landlords get their money up front. The banks will lend them money based on the projected earnings of spaces, whether they're empty or not. So landlords are often sitting on a giant pile of cash. Maybe not you, Bob, but landlords are often sitting on, the bigger landlords are sitting in giant piles of cash, and to them, having an empty place, or not an empty place, it doesn't really matter in the long run.
Hi, my name is Leslie McCarron. I'm the owner of Angelica Kitchen on 12th Street. Well, thank you. Well, those of you that please come by. We're your friends and family. We're struggling just like everybody else. Our rent is now about $20,000 a month. I just negotiated only a 5-year lease, but we don't want to go into all that. My question is, the community board, CB3, in my neighborhood, there was a statistic on the East Village Grief blog within the last few months that they had approved a 60 to 70% increase in permits for restaurants and bars for the last 5 years. Now, the community board, it seems to me that they're enacting this growth that implies like a huge turnaround. Can somebody clarify for me what the community board's influence and power in all these issues is?
I think Stacey has been studying restaurants in East Village. Would you like to take a stab, Stacey?
Yeah, I don't know if I can answer your question directly, though, in terms of the role of the community board. And there are a couple of things. I don't know what time period you're speaking of, but there has been
It was from 2008 to 2013.
So the numbers that I see are not as high as 60% by any stretch. In terms of, actually, let me just look at the numbers. I happen to bring some numbers. I think when I look at the Lower East Side overall, the rate of growth, well, I can't disaggregate it in terms of just restaurants, but when I look at, I looked at a number of neighborhoods that were considered gentrifying, and the Lower East Side is one of 16 that I have on the list. And when we look at gentrified neighborhoods, the rate of growth of restaurants is 11% between 2004 and 2012. Compared to non-gentrified neighborhoods, which is essentially the rest of the city, that was, it looks like 8%. Right, so it is growing. They're surely growing much faster than the rest of the city, but I don't have numbers that would suggest 60%. But you're talking about licenses, and I know there's a program that expedites bar liquor licenses the city has implemented, but it wasn't implemented that far back. So now owners don't have to wait as long to get a license. But I can't really speak to that because I haven't looked into it.
Luckily, the district manager of CB3 is here, Susan Stetzer. Maybe she can enlighten us.
Okay, first I want to completely understand the question. You're saying the community board
has approved 60% more licenses, is that what you're saying?
Excuse me, she's starting.
Yeah, so why don't you tell us what's up?
Okay, well, first of all, the licenses that the city expedites are non-liquor licenses. Those are Department of Health and other kinds of licenses. The community board has no power whatsoever, really, over beer and wine licenses. The SLA, State Liquor Authority, will approve them. So what the community board tries to do is create stipulations to deal with problems. We do not have the power to say there cannot be a license there. With other licenses, full liquor licenses, sometimes in some areas, depending on how many other licenses there are, the State Liquor Authority will listen to the advisory opinion of the community board, but what we try and do is empower ourselves. People were talking about asking for power earlier. You have to empower yourself. You have to take power, not wait for someone to give you power. And what we have tried to do is work with the State Liquor Authority, work with landlords. We try very hard to try and deal with the situations in the restaurants. We do not have absolute power to say no, nobody can have a license there.
Thank you, Susan. Other questions?
This has to do with the idea of having a small group, preserve places. But I've been in here about 13 years. Interesting mention there about fresh direct, new people moving in, using things that are web-based or easy. I wonder if a small group would also help make like a media company or help publicize the small places. I myself am trying to work on like a web series, trying to go over New York and interview just cool people in spaces. So people that are younger that may not know better, and, sit and be lazy and watch on the computer, but just learn about these places. Make that could be an arm of that group. Another thing, to a while ago, with some people trying to help preserve some of the railway lines that are like the city, so few left. One being the Cheyenne, which I just walked every day, so that is still empty. 6 years, I think, 7. And I wonder if it would be part of a group that maybe, I don't know, people would volunteer or whatever, but to help adapt and reuse spaces where they could have built a 40-story condo tower on top of it, but maybe somehow incorporate, this may be crazy, but put it on stilts so you can preserve the cool diner underneath and still get the money from the rentals on top. But I don't know if there's just people thinking about that.
Well, a couple of responses. First of all, what's your name?
Kyle Sutton.
Kyle said, is it crazy to build something on stilts over something you want to preserve? Apparently it's not, because the whole Hudson Yards development is happening that way. So you can build a whole city on stilts. But about publicity, basically the idea of drawing publicity to places that are worthwhile. I think certainly Robert's plan would do that, but that is the idea of the San Francisco legacy bars and restaurants, where it's purely, they've created a list, and it's really about PR. It's about, getting the word out about the list, about the places on the list, and driving traffic of residents and visitors. Any other restaurateurs, bar owners, any of those folks who are here want to speak or ask a question? We'll just ask them first.
Hi, I'm Tom Bircher. I own the Villager restaurant on 2nd Avenue. I'm very fortunate and blessed that we've been able to survive all this time. We've gone through some rough times. And I'm not exactly sure at the end why we've been so successful for so long, but I have some ideas. I've personally been there for many decades. My son, who's in his late 40s, is very passionate about the business. He's there as well. So that kind of goes to what Mimi was saying. I think that when an owner is there every day and passionately driving their business forward and learning what their customers want, you will succeed, or you will survive. But just I have one small suggestion. I have many suggestions. And this is obviously a very complicated and sticky issue. But I live in the East Village. I have people come visit me fairly regularly, and sometimes I take them some places. Obviously, sometimes we go to the salt, but sometimes I leave them on their own to go eat. And I'll see them in the evening, and I'll say, "Where did you go?" And they'll say, "We went to Olive Garden." And I'm like, "We went to Olive Garden. Why? You know, we have all these wonderful places that, some of which we've mentioned." But middle Americans, I think a lot of times coming to New York are intimidated, and they go to what's familiar because they're kind of scared to go to places and fight with the countermen or whatever. So maybe it would be helpful to have a more concise guide that lists these kind of legacy places that tourists could refer to. I know we have Zag, and I know we have tons of guidebooks. But if it could be distilled somehow so that people coming to New York from middle America with their kids and they're seeing a Broadway show, we'd encourage them to be a little more adventurous and really appreciate more of what this great city has to offer.
Thank you, Tom. Any comments about why tourists would behave that way, or what can be done to drive them to your favorite places?
Yeah, I think that those are some really savvy ideas. I mean, we need to find a way to get tourists in particular interested in not going to the McDonald's, but in going to a place like Veselka that has historic resonance, that represents a whole culture in the East Village that's been around for a long time. There has to be a way, and maybe this committee that I envisioned, part of the thing that they could do is as in San Francisco, make lists of places that are worth going to. It doesn't have to just be intervening in landlord disputes, but also in promoting restaurants that we feel have historic significance. And it could certainly be a lot more than 30. I mean, as a matter of fact, it could involve a large proportion of restaurants that are owned by local people as opposed to being franchise places, which are becoming such a blight in many parts of the city.
I just want to comment on that. I think you raised a really important thing that we haven't discussed in terms of the familiarity of places. And unfortunately, it's not just tourists that are going to these places. They couldn't survive if it was just tourists. The proliferation of 7-Eleven, for instance, in New York is very much about the familiar, right? And many of the Starbucks and all the other kind of both convenience stores and eateries that are chains, people patronize, both residents and tourists. I mean, many of the residents, this city is so transient, people can live here for about a year and they're still going to a place that they're more familiar with. So addressing that, I guess the only way you can fully address it is ban any kind of chain store. But that's a huge, I think the emotional component of that is something that it's hard to touch, to figure out how to address that. I think that's a good point.
I think there are some changes that we're all aware of, whether it's Eater, Urban Spoon, Yelp. Social media is taking a bigger effect, and certainly as every generation coming up is more and more tech savvy and constantly attached to their phones. So, I know when I'm traveling now, we're picking up, we'll see what does Urban Spoon have to say wherever we are. You'll have, and so there is opportunity. Now, I think something to help older restaurants is to have them become more social media savvy. And that's probably an area that could use help. And whether you're writing something in Yelp or, those are areas I think that there could be growth in supporting restaurants.
In fact, Tom, it's surprising that people do that in this age of, it seems like there's so many guides, but your point is well taken. Ted, we had another restaurateur over here. Yeah. Could you raise your hand so you can see?
I just want to say thanks to GVSHP for all your good work. And I'm sorry, I'm a bit nervous because I don't want to say exactly who I am in case someone from my landlord's office is here. But I was very touched by Mr. Sietsema putting, all the sentiments together because, look, I'm not complaining about attorneys and everything, but after 15 years, we're the only restaurant or like business open on both sides of the block. You know, and the places have been vacant for 16 years. It's strange. And after 10 years, on the 10-year mark when our lease was up, we got this bizarre bill for $250,000. It was a water bill, retroactive 10 years. And my dad and I were like, what is this? We completely allowed ourselves to be extorted. I mean, it's just not right. I'm happy my dad left. He got disgusted and just like walked out. I mean, he will make some good points, but there are stories out there. And, you know, for the past 6 years, the man won't even sit down with us to actually negotiate a lease. It's beyond anything. I have 50 employees, you know, and it's a valid business. And we do a lot for the community. The restaurateurs our whole lives. I don't know how else to. There's no other vocation I would have. Born and raised in Manhattan. My dad's been in the restaurant business in the Village for 60 years. You know, and we've never encountered anything like this. Like, who do we go to? Well, I mean, and I can afford, I allow myself each rent increase to be extorted. I mean, we're keeping up with it. Barely with the.
Well, thank you for sharing your story. And,
wait, I wanted to say that I want to get rid of your mask and give you a halo mask.
angel mask. So Robert maybe he'll being an angel instead of a devil. But anyway, I'm sure everyone's heart goes out to you, and we can talk afterward about some ideas. You have attorneys, that's good. And I think just one thing, I happened to, be chatting with a stranger last week who had a similar story as on the residential side. I mean, I'm just, as you say, the game is on another level, and unfortunately, in New York City, as for residential and commercial tenants, it can really be extraordinary and ruin your life. Susan, quickly, did you have, our district manager had some advice maybe?
I just want to mention something that can be changed. Bob mentioned the property tax. We have researched that with a number of restaurants in the East Village, and 300% over, say, 5 or 7 years is not an exaggeration. This is a political thing that can be changed.
A 300% increase in
property tax, and that's on top of the rent. And when they do their business plan, they're not expecting this 300%. So this is something that really can be changed and should be worked on.
Thank you. Any other questions? More questions? What?
Just ask Bob, are you really suggesting that exorbitant and prohibitive rent increase is not the overall reason why old school businesses close? That's what it sounds like. Just in terms of the second-hand deli, I read a story, I don't think that's reported, but in the Real Deal, I interviewed the brokerage who negotiated that change to a Chase bank. And while you're right, they're going to remain there, the rent would at least double. Most small businesses cannot sustain that. So, just,
I think in that case it was closer to 15%. I can't remember the numbers, but what I'm saying is it does occur, and everyone knows situations. I heard Joe's Dairy just closed because of a rent increase. And to me, that's a loss of the treasure right there. It does occur, but quite often, I think the majority of the time, it has to do with the place not doing that well. Whether we're talking about Manitus, like Cafe, if you look at a lot of the places that have left, the majority of them are not doing the business. And you could say how attacked we are to them, and then ask, when's the last time you ate there? And quite often the answer is, it's been years. But I loved it. I really loved the place. I don't want to see it go. So the majority of the time, places go out of vogue, and it could be bad management, it could be changes in style, but that's the majority of what's happening. And there are other cases, which are still significant, where rent increases will force out restaurants. Union Square Café, there's an example, where Danny Meyer said they're getting, rents are so high. So you're going to wind up with a clothing store in there. It probably will not be a restaurant. The owner suggested, why don't you just put a Shake Shack in there? That could afford it. Well, Danny Myers will probably pick a busier location for the Shake Shack. It's, so there are a number of tragic cases where people are being hurt. But here's the other side of what can and often does occur. People come to me and say, I'm interested in selling my business. First thing we look at is their lease. You have 5 years left, you have 3 years left. Go negotiate a longer lease. Then we can probably get you a decent price on the sale. The same thing will happen if you give someone like iconic restaurant, a great deal on the rent. A certain percentage of the time, you'll be transferring an economic good to them, and they're going to cash out. And the next guy coming in, he's going to raise the prices because he just paid for it. It's not always going to be that scenario, but it will happen. When you control any economic good, you're going to wind up with different activities occurring, which you had no idea would be the consequence.
Lady in the back.
Hi, I'm Sarah from the East Village Community Coalition. I'd like to shift the conversation a little bit and actually respond to the owner of your Dolphin's Kitchen. One thing that we're seeing is really high turnover, especially with new restaurants. Now, this is not new, but the rate at which this is happening, I think it might speak to the amount of licensing that we're seeing in some cases, is that businesses just aren't surviving even the very short period that they thought they would exist. I'd like to pose to you a couple of questions. One is the business model changing in terms of how projections are made for restaurateurs and how long they'll be in business, how long they plan to be in business, or how long they can practically be in business. And second, how are what can we do to sort of create more legacy businesses in the future? We're talking about businesses that have been here for a long time and we want to maintain them and stand by that. But how can we get businesses that are here, that have been in business for 10 years that are great, to really get them on a longer track and to be sure that they are the next generation of legacy businesses?
Is there anybody want to start with that? The question, so the second question was, how can the businesses that are in operation today essentially become legacy businesses, become classics? And the first one was, is there a new model? Right. What is a successful model today? One question I have, Sarah, in East Village, which is so saturated with restaurants and bars, maybe it's a challenging environment to make a go of it because you simply have too much competition, which is, I think, maybe what you were getting at. But a new model. Do we need a new model for a restaurant to be successful in 2014?
The restaurant culture is incredibly vibrant, and I see all the time changes in restaurants. For example, one of the things that's happening around here is what's happened already in Singapore, where food courts are now becoming places for kind of smaller scale restaurant businesses. I mean, we saw when Shopson's moved from their place, incredibly expensive place down on Houston Street. They'd been on Bedford before that. They moved into that Essex Street Market, clearly at a kind of a lower rent. A lot of places are moving into food courts, and you find sometimes 15 or 20 businesses in the food courts. So maybe that's a paradigm for the future. Trucks were another possibility. Many restaurateurs were starting their businesses in trucks, which is kind of sad, or in street side stands or stalls. But yeah, the restaurant culture is a very vibrant one, and we will have places to eat whatever happens. Sadly, they may not be as good, they may not be as comfortable, because who wants to stand in a pool of truck exhaust in the rain eating a $10 hamburger?
Right now, many expensive ones are not comfortable. I've decided that what you have to do to be a hot restaurant is assure discomfort. Too dark, too noisy, too cramped. Eat at the counter, no place for your handbag, and you can't get in.
You're going to be amazed at this, but a restaurant consultant that I talked to to recently told me that the reason that restaurants are so noisy and dark these days, so you can't even have a conversation, is to keep the old people out, that they only want young patrons. So they figure that old people can't see very well, and old people like to have conversations between themselves. So if those are your priorities, then you're, fucked.
And it leads to one thing that always increases profit. Sell more booze and less food. So a younger group of people, the demographic is more likely to drink, it's a lot easier to produce, and it's a lot more profitable. Profits are higher.
Yeah, this is actually rather dire. I mean, I know many restaurateurs who start out in business well capitalized, and we have promoted a restaurant culture, all of us who write about food, where the newfangled is more important than the sustainable. And so we have a ridiculous turnover of restaurants, and people that go into restaurant business, my hat's off to you, because it's a very romantic notion that you can start a restaurant and make a success of it. But never has it been more difficult to, or with more competition, or with more stumbling blocks than today.
So, thank you all. There's more to talk about, but unfortunately we have to leave the church. Thank you so much to our panelists.